Hi, y'all, and welcome to the live stream. Every time I come on, I think to myself, I could not possibly top the information that is going to come out tonight. This is the biggest night. From here on out, it's kind of downhill. I again think that we are actually, I'm just going to give you a little preview of what we're going to be talking about. We're going to be talking about Satan and the really cold tacos from hell. And you're going to think to yourself, you made that up, Lee. There wasn't testimony about Satan and the really cold tacos from hell. All I can say is keep listening. We're going to be talking about some shocking new text messages that came into evidence. Some of those are hot and some of them are cold. You'll see what I mean when we get to that. And a really big dispute about the evidence. And I think maybe a serious one for appeal. Now, as you know, I've said many a time, appeals almost never win. But this dispute is a real one, and I think we will definitely see it when it comes to the appeal. So let's get started. Be sure to hit that like button as you're coming into the live stream. And let's get started. Ian Pawlowski was on the stand. Our last live was on Wednesday. He was on the stand for just a half hour toward the end of the day, and then for more time on Thursday. So we're going to be covering Thursday's and Friday's testimony in what we're going to be talking about today. But I said I'd put Ian Pawlowski all in one. So you're going to hear the entire synopsis of what he said right now. Now, quick refresher, like Ian, who is Ian? Isn't this Lori Vallow Daybell's trial? Yes, but quick refresher, Lori is the defendant. Lori and Chad are accused of murdering 3 people. JJ Vallow, you can see him in red down below Lori. He was Lori's son by Charles Vallow. Well, technically, actually, they adopted JJ. But then Tylee Ryan, who was Lori's daughter by Joe Ryan, was age 16. JJ was 7. And then Lori now is married to Chad Daybell. He's a defendant and accused with her of JJ and Tylee's murder, and Tammy Daybell, who is his wife. They are both accused of conspiring to murder Tammy Daybell. We're going to hear about all of those tonight in the testimony. Another thing to know is Melanie B., the niece of Lori, Melanie Boudreau, Melanie Pawlowski, is also going to be figuring importantly. She was married to Brandon Boudreau. That's the purple circle. We are going to hear about Brandon Boudreau's shooting. We're hitting it all tonight, basically. We're hitting just about everything. So Ian Pawlowski and Melanie had only dated for 10 days when they got married. In that 10 days, they managed to meet, fall in love. He actually asked Chad and Lori for permission to marry Melanie. They approved, apparently, and Melanie and Ian married in Vegas after just the 10 days of dating. Now, he talked a little bit about casting and the casting out of evil spirits that we've heard about from other witnesses like Zulema, like Lori. And casting, he said, involved sort of a bug-like possession where something crawled in your ear and got in your brain and took over your body. He said he was open to new beliefs, at least he thought he was. But after a few days, he decided this whole light and dark and ranking people thing, he just wasn't really on board with that. And he said, furthermore, that Lori said that the detectives who were looking for JJ and Tylee, who were missing at the time, and the police, all of them were dark and said, don't cooperate with law enforcement. So the morning after he married Melanie, he says she shared everything. Always a bad sign when your new spouse finally shares everything the day after you get married. But in any event, that's apparently when she shared everything. His 2 kids were with him at the time. I guess they attended the wedding. He said the next morning, he didn't really describe exactly what was shared, but the next morning he got up and his daughter was missing. He said it was terrifying, just absolutely petrifying. Where is she? It turned out he hears a little giggle. All she is hiding behind the curtain. She's fine. But he said at that moment, he decided he was out. He was out. So he's been married to Melanie less than a week, and he goes to the police. And they ask him to make recordings of his wife talking to Lori and Chad Daybell. In fact, he does make 9 recordings. Now, something really weird about those recordings is that apparently, first of all, Chad and Lori didn't confess to anything. But even more bizarrely, they apparently were so not inculpatory. That means didn't make it seem like they were guilty, didn't do anything to increase the likelihood that they were guilty, that the exact opposite happened of what you would think. You would think the prosecution would want this in. After all, law enforcement asked for these recordings. It was the other way around. Prosecution was trying to keep these out, and the defense wanted these recordings in. It's just bizarre. So we, though, still haven't heard these recordings. And I'll tell you what the argument was all about. Now, the defense started by saying, you, prosecution, have said her religious beliefs are part of an overt act as part of the conspiracy to murder. So you have to allow in these to explain her actions. But the state said, look, we can't put these in because there are people talking on these recordings who are not present in court. So what they say is hearsay. For example, Melanie Boudreau Pawlowski isn't here. And part of the statements were made by Melanie. So we can't have these in because it's hearsay. So then the defense said, and the prosecution also said, besides, what Chad and Lori say on this could be self-serving, just to kind of protect themselves. Remember, they made that exact same argument when it came to Lori's podcast. But this time around, the state's argument really is stronger because when it came to Lori's podcast, that happened before the kids disappeared, before anybody was shot at. So there would be less reason for Lori to make up things to protect herself. These recordings, on the other hand, happened after all of that. So there would be more reason for Lori to be protecting herself. And the state also said, look, religious beliefs, we never said they were an overt act. We just said that they were the religious beliefs were used to control other people. So the defense said, look, this is not hearsay because there are other co-conspirators, and maybe Melanie could be one of those unnamed and uncharged co-conspirators, which is kind of a cute argument, but wasn't. The judge quickly dismissed it and said, look, no, that's, I don't find this, I'm not going to let this in because it's hearsay. And so I'm not going to, but, Melanie is not a co-conspirator who is accused. So at this point, then, none of the recordings have come in. Ian Pawlowski, however, is still under defense subpoena. So there is another shot. There's a possibility we're going to see this. We're going to hear one of the recordings later on. But right now, everything's out. We haven't heard about it. But here's what he did have to say, because, of course, he talked about those recordings as well as what he had heard. So we got to hear a little bit about it. We heard about the fact that on the day Alex died, Lori told Melanie to get to a place of safety. It sounded like it frightened her. One time, he also told us Melanie was sick, and on the call, Lori said, and this is what I was talking about, that she folded Satan up like a taco and locked him in a box in Antarctica. Read that one more time. She folded Satan up like a taco and locked him in a box in Antarctica. Now, Lori told Melanie that her ex-husband, now Brandon Boudreau, was dark. She also said that Melanie should not cooperate with law enforcement. Ian was very clear that Lori didn't want anybody cooperating in the attempt to find Tylee and JJ, which, given that their bodies were found buried in Chad Daybell's backyard, is understandable. Lori and Chad told Melanie that there was going to be that spiritual attack on the day that Alex died. And the suggestion from the prosecution is that means they knew about it, that they were involved in that. Now, they have not been charged in anything connected to the death of Alex. I think that there frankly just was not enough evidence of that. His death was deemed to be of natural causes. And you're like, wait, Alex, who? Sorry, Alex is the brother of Lori and heavily involved in all of this, but for the fact that he is in fact called a co-conspirator. But since he is dead, he's not actually, of course, being tried. Now, I thought this was a great quote. I really sat and pondered it from Ian. And I think it kind of encapsulates the prosecution's case from their point of view. He said, there's reality, and then there's layers of spiritual explanation that were laid over reality. And I think that's the prosecution's case in a nutshell, is that there's this reality of the murders and of the things that were done. And on top of that, there was this spiritual explanation, like, oh yeah, we had to do that because an evil spirit had possessed them. They become a zombie. I had to free them. And that spiritual explanation was put on top of what was otherwise completely inexplicable. Now, for y'all just coming into the live stream, be sure to hit that like button so we can get it out to more people. And I'll keep going. Taylor Ballard was the next witness, a health insurance broker in Rexburg, Idaho, where Chad Daybell lived. In November 21st, 2019, he got a health insurance policy because he needed one after Tammy had died. His insurance had come through her. And he asked if he could add a spouse. And the answer was yes, if he did it within 60 days of marriage. But apparently, and oddly, he never did. I don't know if Lori had other coverage or what the explanation for that was, but he never added her. Well, in March of 2020, the kids still had not been found. And Chad informed her that he didn't have kids to insure, but his wife was incarcerated by that time in March of 2020. And he was really worried about something happening to her, which makes no sense. She was incarcerated, and you don't need insurance when you're incarcerated. I'm not saying it's good medical care, because there are many stories that suggest that it's not, but it is medical care, and you can't just go out to your outside own doctor. You have to receive the medical care provided in the prison. So I don't know why he would have even been thinking about that. But in any event, at that point, it was too late because they'd already been married for 60 days. And there was a loophole. If they had just moved from another state, she could be eligible. And he said, we just moved from Hawaii, which probably isn't true in terms of timing, but might have been. I'm not sure. So thank you, Brenda Stone. I appreciate the super sticker. Now, the next witness was Angela Yancey. She did the payroll and benefits for the school where Tammy Daybell worked. Now, she took us through that life insurance because it has been a little bit confusing from some of the other witnesses, but she would be pretty much the ultimate source since she's the one who actually does the insurance for the school. And what she said was in 2018, when Tammy came to work for the school, she picked the minimum $10,000 life insurance. But in September of 2019, she upped her life insurance to $130,000, which was 5 times her salary. That was the most she could do. And then she added an additional, or 5 times her salary, and then added the additional amount that she was allowed to add. This was voluntary life insurance. This wasn't something where the school provided it. You had to get this and pay for it extra. She died on a Saturday, and the witness said on Monday, Chad Daybell asked for the insurance. So Saturday to Monday, he's already ready to go. And furthermore, she said, well, you're going to need those death certificates in order to do that. He said, yeah, I already did that, ordered 8 copies, which she seemed to think was a lot. I don't think that's a lot, but I do think Monday already being so ready into the administrative that you're already ordering the death certificates and claiming the life insurance is very, very fast. Prosecution's point, this was not a surprise to Chad, nor was it something he was particularly emotionally cut up over, even though he'd been married to Tammy for 30 years. The cross-examination I thought was pretty good. They asked about Chad going in, and according to the witness, as far as she knew, Chad did not go in with Tammy to get this life insurance. This was Tammy doing it by herself. Was it pushed by Chad? Maybe, but it wasn't like the two of them went in together. Also, open enrollment was just once a year. So Tammy was making this choice at the only time she could. Both of those I thought were pretty good cross points. Now, the next witness was Detective Colin Nesbitt from the Kauai Police Department, where, as you know, Chad Daybell and Lori Daybell fled, I would say, after Idaho began looking into the disappearance of JJ and Tylee. This witness put together a lot of information that had sort of been flowing out there and put things together about several key facts. First of all, I loved this visual. The Rexburg police came to Hawaii, and working with Nesbitt, they served Lori at the pool area with Chad. So you can just kind of picture Chad and Lori lounging by the pool, and here come the police serving them with these papers because Lori was ordered to produce the children who were missing, and they were trying to figure out, where are they? And I want to say thank you to Mr. RN. Good to have you in the live again. And also to Talia. Good to see you again, too. So there were also some sticky notes they found that said some of those names, plus some new ones that we've been hearing about. Hiplos, remember, was one of the evil spirits that was in Charles Vallow. There was also a note that had Brandon and under it Anjo. I don't know if that was an evil spirit too. And then there was another note that said Gladius. We don't know who the evil spirit Gladius was, or even if that wasn't an evil spirit, but it certainly seemed like it fit in with the other notes. There also was this comment, and please put in the comments if you have any idea what this means, but in their apartment in Hawaii, the police searched the apartment of Chad and Lori Daybell where they were living. They found a bag of silicone rings. What is the significance of that? If any of you know, I would really like to understand that comment. So please put that in the chat if you know what that means. The cross-examination was sort of pointing out that they were looking for evidence of the kids, and there just wasn't any, which could cut either way if you ask me. And also that the police weren't, although they claimed to be looking for evidence of the kids, that really was not what they were looking for. For example, they didn't bother to collect any trace evidence. They showed, the defense lawyer pointed out the fact that there was Tylee's credit card, and beside it were a bunch of hairs. They didn't bother to collect those, test those, anything like that. So the next witness was Officer Ryan Pilar, the Gilbert police officer. And I want to show you, and now the reason that this witness was particularly controversial is because they're pulling in the Brandon Boudreau shooting. Now, Brandon Boudreau the shooting at him is not anything that's at issue in this case. This is the murder of JJ, murder of Tylee, conspiracy to murder Tammy. That's all that's at stake here. But a shooting at Brandon Boudreau is right flat in the middle of this case, as is the shooting death of Charles Vallow, Lori's ex-husband. They can't be part of the case. They didn't happen in Idaho. Idaho has no jurisdiction to actually prosecute those cases. Those cases happened in Arizona. And so what the prosecution is doing is putting this in because they think it's important to showing the case. But it is controversy on the defense does not want it in. So let's talk about what that is. And I want to say thank you to Diane Husseini. Thank you very much for the super sticker. I appreciate that. And to Janine Knight. I appreciate the super sticker from you too. Thank you both. So let's look at Rule 404. Here we go. Idaho Rule 404. This is what the defense is citing, saying you really, Judge, shouldn't allow in all of this information about Brandon Boudreau being shot in Arizona because you can't use other crimes, evidence of a crime, wrong, or other act is not admissible to prove a person's character in order to show that on a particular occasion, the person acted in accordance with the character. Now, breaking that down in sort of more plain English terms, what they're saying is you can't say, look, this is just a bad person. This person committed other crimes, so it's a lot more likely they committed this crime. That's not how our system works. Our system works, the prosecution has to prove that Lori Vallow committed this crime, not that she's the kind of person who commits crimes and will prove it with other things. So, but notice this, there are permitted uses for other crimes. And Louise Jeffy, I want to say thank you for the super sticker. Some of the other ways you could use this would be evidence may be admissible for another purpose, like proving motive, like proving opportunity, intent, preparation, plan, knowledge, identity, absence of mistake, or lack of accident. So if the prosecution uses the evidence for something other than just to show that Lori Vallow is a bad person who typically did crimes, that's permissible. So there was huge dispute throughout the trial about the Brandon Boudreau shooting and the shooting killing of Charles Vallow. And it was here with this witness again throughout the trial. That will definitely be an appeal issue, those letting that evidence in. But boy, I will say this. I felt like of all the evidence that the prosecution has presented in the case, I thought the evidence about the Brandon Boudreau shooting was about as strong as they got. I would call it the Jeep that started it all. And what they said, thank you to Cynthia Counts, I appreciate that. They started with Brandon Boudreau dropping his child off at his ex-wife, Melanie Boudreau's house, going to the gym and returning to his new house. And he testified that there were only about 5 people who even knew he had this new house. Most people, it wasn't something he had lived there a long time. There weren't many people who even knew that he lived there. The detective, the officer, talked about ring footage from other neighbors showing a Jeep idling at his house for about an hour and a half. And then also that the tire on the back of the Jeep was missing. You remember that footage from the storage locker in Rexburg, Idaho? It showed Lori and Chad taking a Jeep seat or something. The testimony looked like a Jeep seat and putting it in this storage locker right on the exact day, the day before the Brandon Boudreau shooting, and also a big tire. That's why this is so important. And the reason the testimony was that the wheel needed to be taken off the back of the Jeep was you couldn't roll the back window all the way down. And according to Brandon Boudreau, as he was driving to his house, the back window comes down, a gun sticks out with a silencer pointed at him and shoots him. The officer talked about the fact that there was, in fact, a bullet hole in the front driver's side door of the Tesla that Brandon Boudreau was driving. They then used a license plate reader system to follow that Jeep, and they tracked it, that exact Jeep, that license plate, and they tracked it in Idaho Falls, October 1, the day before Brandon Boudreau was shot at, then in Arizona, and then back in Idaho Falls on October 3rd. They also had evidence that one of the phones that Alex Cox regularly used was parked near Brandon's residence at the time of the shooting and then left for Idaho shortly thereafter. There was gunshot residue collected on the back of that Jeep. It was technically Tylee's Jeep, but of course, by this time, Tylee, the prosecution says, was already dead. She'd already been murdered. And there was, according to the officer, motive for this because Melanie and Brandon had life insurance policies. They were getting divorced, but as of this time, the life insurance policy was payable if either one of them died to the present spouse. Both, in fact, had to sign to cancel it. So one could not unilaterally cancel that. So if Brandon had died, then Melanie would have received $200,000. Now, she also got a payout from her divorce with Brandon, and the judge refused to let the witness say how much that was. But we do know she got a payout, and she would have been paid $200,000 if he had died. The witness also talked about Venmo and text messages and cash exchanges between Melanie and Alex and Lori and Chad. There wasn't a lot of explanation for that, just that it happened. It probably the most important point for this case, the murder cases, is that it started the search in Idaho, because it started all of these law enforcement organizations talking to each other, because now you had Arizona talking to Idaho, and they find out about Tammy Daybell having died. And then the FBI comes in and starts looking for the kids. And the police, and he talked about the fact the police were told that JJ was with Melanie Gibb. They went to 2 homes where she lived. She wasn't there. They tried to call her, and she did call back, and she said she wasn't in Arizona. That's what this witness said. He set up pole cameras at her house, but there wasn't anything that really explained to us what was found with that. I was very curious about that. But we do know that shortly after this, Melanie Gibb told the police she, in fact, did not have JJ. And it was sort of the beginning of the cascade, and not the beginning, I guess we're in the middle by now, the cascade of events that showed that there was there were serious problems in lots of different directions. And the investigation just began to branch out. Now, the argument there was the testimony of Douglas Hart. He was the FBI agent at the time and ran the investigations. He was going to be the next witness. Douglas Hart was going to summarize, and he did, I don't mean to talk in the past tense, but summarize Lori's iCloud accounts. But the prosecution wanted to put it in through a 160-something page exhibit. And they wanted that summary to be put in to evidence, and they wanted him to be able to use it. And the defense had several arguments. They said, first of all, you didn't give us these exhibits until May 2nd. This is now May 4th. And you didn't give it to us, for that matter, until 6 p.m. So basically, we have 1 day to review this huge exhibit that puts together everything. And furthermore, we don't think this witness should be testifying at all. We don't think Doug Hart should be testifying, because he sat in on and helped prepare all of the other law enforcement witnesses. And so we believe that violates the exclusionary rule. We've talked about that. The exclusionary rule says, and I'm spoiler alert, but the exclusionary rule says you can't listen to the testimony of other people testifying at the trial until your testimony is over and done with. And that way, there's no risk that you have been prejudiced or biased or changed your testimony or even just remembered new things. You testify to what you know about without any reference to what other people said. So, and Judge Boyce ruled that, and I agree with this, that's about testimony. So preparing people to testify when they haven't testified yet, that doesn't even count. This is about testimony. But the defense also argued that exhibit that he wanted to use, that's like closing argument. They said it puts together everything, and it's huge. You can't just let them put in their closing argument through this one witness. And there's a lot, they said, in there that's very editorialized. It's people saying their arguments in a very biased, argumentative way, and you can't just do that. And the judge said, yeah, I'm not going to allow this in. It's too much. But I might let in an exhibit with some of that argumentative language removed, maybe a smaller exhibit. So by the next morning, the prosecution presented a shortened exhibit. Now, the defense continued to say, look, we got this one at 8 p.m. last night. How are we supposed to prepare? And it has hearsay statements, they said. For example, it had statements from Melanie Pawlowski, who hasn't even been called, hasn't testified, isn't here, can't be cross-examined. So it's inappropriate hearsay, and we want at least these pages out. The prosecution made this argument, oh, well, this is really just conversations of the defendant, not hearsay. But they did not make that same argument when they wanted to keep out those text messages that between Melanie and Lori. They wanted them out and said, look, that would be hearsay because Melanie isn't here. The judge allowed this in if foundation was laid, including the hearsay. I disagree with that. I think that the judge made an error there. I have said many a time, appeals are, you just never win an appeal. You just don't win appeals. It's very rare. There is percentage wise, the chances that a criminal defendant wins an appeal are small. So do I think that this case is going to be reversed over this? I do not. Do I think that it's maybe a problem? Yeah, I don't think it was fair that one got allowed in and the other didn't. But in any event, it did. So the ruling was, okay, I'm going to let this in. And the testimony then was that this particular FBI agent was charged in general with looking for missing children. And he talked about going onto the property of Chad Daybell's backyard and noticing that the spot where JJ's body was buried looked different. He talked about the fact that it was a different color. The texture of the dirt was different. He could tell immediately this is probably where one of the children is buried. And in fact, that's where JJ's body was. And then he got into Lori's iCloud account, which was under a couple of different names, Lolly Time and Lori 4, the number 4 style. And he said he read all of her text messages between October 2018 and November 2019 from Lori 4 style, and talked about some of the things. And there were some very interesting text messages that we got into then the next day that Chad and Lori said they wanted to, he summarized them. Chad and Lori said they wanted to get married. They called their spouses obstacles. They called JJ and Tylee obstacles, and that they made references to the life insurance policy for Charles Vallow that Lori thought she would be the beneficiary of, but in fact was not, because Charles had very wisely changed the beneficiary to his sister. And also talked about the Social Security payments for JJ and for Tylee. I want to throw in, well, I'll come back to that. Let me go on to the text messages, which were testified about today. And I'll show you with the screen share. There we go. Okay. Let me pull that up. There were, this is the timeline I've been using throughout. To me, it's so helpful to be able to see the timeline and see where these plug in chronologically. So that's what the point of this is. So I thought this was very interesting. In January of 2019, you may remember that testimony from I said Lori to Chad. I didn't mean Lori to Chad. I meant Lori to her friend. I think it was Audrey. Wasn't that her name? Lori said, I'm excited to be able to talk with you about what we both know. And I just think it's fun to talk to someone who knows what's really going on. Smiling. The prosecution is using this to say Lori and Chad already were having an affair by January of 2019. What was really going on was that Chad and Lori were having an affair. And it wasn't new. It didn't happen in the summer. It happened all the way by January 2019. There was something really going on between the two of them. Then in March of 2019, Alex texted Lori saying, Charles's body is still alive. Already then, the prosecution would say, Alex and Lori had a belief and were saying that Charles's body needed to die because he was possessed by this evil spirit. The prosecution is going to use this to say, this is clearly malice aforethought. Lori already was thinking she wanted Charles dead by March of 2019. The reasoning not being important, the fact that she definitely wanted him dead and then took steps, that's what the prosecution would say is important. Although remember, Charles Vallow's death is not technically at issue in this case. Then in July, on the 9th of July, 2019, remember this is just 2 days before Charles Vallow is about to be shot and killed by Alex Vallow, by Alex Cox, Lori's brother. Lori and Alex were both at the house. Charles came over to pick up JJ to take him to school. Fight ensues, and Alex shoots and kills Charles Vallow, who was at that time Lori's husband. On the 9th, 2 days before that happens, Lori texted her friend, her niece, Melanie, saying, they have an elaborate plan. I'll call you soon. And the prosecution, I think, will suggest or ask the jury to imply that they means at a minimum Alex and Chad, and this elaborate plan is to kill Charles. And Melanie says, I could take all the babies with and drive and take our stuff. And Lori says, you can't go at all. We both need to stay here to defend ourselves. And Lori says, it's coming to a head. This week will change everything. Then on July 9th, Lori texts Alex saying, getting sleepy. So I'm going to need you to stay close to me for the next couple days. Mel too, her friend Melanie Gibb, I think she means, but she might mean Melanice, I don't know. Mel too, she can't go to Utah. They are planning some kind of intervention, but want Mel out of the way so I'm left alone. I need to come get the stuff at your house tomorrow and secure it. Lots to do. Thank you for standing by me. It's all coming to a head this week. I will be like Nephi, I am told, and so will you. And at this point, the officer testified, who is Nephi? That Nephi in the Mormon scriptures was, or at least in Mormon stories, I don't know if it's in the scriptures, their scriptures or not, but Nephi was commanded by God. He was supposed to collect some kind of papers before he left on a journey. And he was commanded to kill the person who had those papers and therefore be able to take them with him. The implication here is that Lori had to kill someone, her husband, Charles Vallow, in order to do her mission for God. And that's what the implication of this whole Nephi discussion is. Now, the next day, there was a text message saying, Al is here. Charles says he will come over in the morning. So they're fully aware Charles is coming the next day. No surprise there. And by the next day, early morning, even pretty early, Charles Vallow is dead and killed by a shot. Alex Cox, Tylee, Lori all said Alex shot Charles Vallow. And they all claimed it was in self-defense. At the time, law enforcement bought that, and there was no real pushback on that. Now, Lori is accused in that shooting case. That's one of the cases facing Lori, although it's not technically at issue in this one. Then the prosecution also managed to get some good, I thought, with some very cold text messages from Lori to Charles Vallow's sons. And I thought, let's just take a look at that. Oh, thank you, Grisha, sir. I appreciate that. Thank you very much. All right, so here is, like, just picture this, okay? She's been married to Charles Vallow for many years. I think it was 13 years. I could be wrong on that, but she's been married to him, and these are his sons by a prior marriage, and he dies. What would you do? You would call the sons, right? She sends them a text message, and the text message, hi, boys. I have very sad news. Your dad passed away yesterday. Yesterday. She didn't even tell them on the day it happened. I'm working on making arrangements, and I'll keep you informed with what's going on. I'm still not sure how to handle things. Just want you to know that I love you, and so did your dad. Heart emoji. This went on for a while because at that point, she just ghosted them. I mean, just left it. And they're writing, what funeral home is he at? What happened? And Lori, what the blank happened? You can't just tell us our dad died and disappeared. You're not too busy to just let us know how he died and disappear. And then, Lori, it's been 3 hours. You're not that busy. I don't care what you're doing. And there were text messages like this, one after the other. Well, what happened? Lori never answered those questions. She never actually came up with any explanation for why he died. She never told them, well, okay, granted, it was self-defense and my brother shot him. None of that. She just let it go. And I think the prosecution made some really good hay with that, how cold that was and how cold it seemed. Now, let's go on back to our timeline. Okay, there we go. So after that rather cold text message, the next text message that he talked about that I added to the timeline was shortly after that. Now, poor Charles Vallow has been shot, remember, on the 11th. Now, it's 3 days later, and Chad is texting Lori, I need so badly to just gently kiss you for hours. It would likely lead to other activities. And Lori says, likely or luckily? And Chad, it would likely lead to nakedness. And they also, on that same day, were arranging to trick Tammy Daybell into thinking that Chad was going to be speaking at a conference when really he was just breaking away to be with Lori. All of that happening immediately after Charles Vallow has been killed. Were there any more? Okay, so that covers our text messages. And there were also, okay. There was one on July 14th. I guess I didn't add this to the timeline. Chad wrote to Lori and said, good morning, my most beautiful Lily. They called each other names other than their present names, which I believed related to their names in prior lives when they had been married more than once in the past. And Chad says to Lori, thanks for joining me in the shower this morning. Wow, getting ready to leave for my meetings. Does noon your time look like a time we could talk? I love you so immensely that the whole universe knows it. And very soon, the people on this little blue globe will know it too. And well, one of the things that was interesting about this is they were not together. They weren't actually physically in a shower together, the witness said, because at this date, he was in Idaho and she was in Arizona. So this may relate to what we've heard about in the past. Oh, I need to take that out. Okay. May relate to what we've heard about in the past, that Chad had some portal of communication in Lori's was in her closet. And I think the witness didn't know where exactly Chad's was, but somewhere in his bedroom where they could communicate with each other. So that may be where the celestial shower was, where they were together or whatever it was. These text messages have only just begun, I think, because the witness is still on the stand. The witness is not finished. There hasn't been cross-examination. And I suspect that there will be many more. You can see we sort of stopped early. It is really going to be interesting if they have some messages that relate to Tylee and JJ, because we've seen very little communication. We know that there were communications around this time, but we don't have a lot of information about what was said. There may not be any information, but this witness may have some. So this is the summary witness, and the prosecution wants to use him to put the entire case together. We are covering this case, as you know, every night, and we'll be back to our every night schedule next week, Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. This case is, I don't know that I've ever seen a case quite like this before. The Murdaugh trial, we really enjoyed covering that on the channel. I think there were so many people here, and we had a great time learning about the case, the facts, the law. This case is even wilder, maybe even more convoluted than the Murdaugh trial was, potentially. It is quite something. So all that to say, you need to hit that subscribe button, because you do not want to miss what comes next in this case. So if you would, please be sure to hit the like button, and I will see you next week on Monday at 7 p.m.